There, is that better? Yep. Sorry. So before I get to those, I wanted to take a minute commercial break to follow up with you all about the Magi ministry, which I talked about a few weeks ago. And again, it's like I think our 7th year to participate in this program, and hoping that once again we have really good help and participation in that. And I wanted to brief you about something from last year. So I pulled this down from the website. They send us updates, annual updates and so forth, and quarterly updates. This one is about the Magi Project coming from Healing Hands International, and it talks about Christmas comes early in Zambia. It was posted July 17th of this year. I want to read you this short article. Jason Njambi shares a tragically common story with many Zambian children. His mother died while giving birth to him. As recently as 30 years ago, when this situation happened, the baby was buried alive with the mother. This disturbing act was considered to be more humane than letting the baby slowly starve to death without his mother's milk. After learning about this practice, our partners, the Nwangian Mission, probably butchering that name, immediately answered God's call to offer assistance to the situation, and the Haven was born. This ministry serves as a temporary children's home where any newborn whose mother has died can be brought in, be taken care of, loved on, and fed for about 2 years. After the 2 years has passed, the baby is returned to the family, healthy and eating solid foods. In many cases, the father is remarried by this time, and the couple is ready to reassume guardianship of the baby. Well, this particular story is about this boy named Jason. He is one of many children who have been rescued by the Haven. During our trip, we had the honor of presenting him and his siblings with their very own Magi boxes. Jason was elated to open his gift that you so thoughtfully packed. He pulled out the contents gingerly and inspected each thing carefully. He immediately narrowed in on the container of bubbles and his favorite item, and worked on his blowing technique for the remainder of our visit. This precious 10-year-old boy dreams of being a pilot when he grows up, which seems totally realistic since he's at the top of his class in school and feels annoyed anytime he has to miss class. Thank you for blessing Jason with a Magi box. Your godly impact of love in his life will not soon be forgotten. We're looking forward to see where this leads. And I just read that particular story got me because that's where we sent our Magi boxes. And who knows, maybe one of the boxes we sent last year is the one that Jason opened. But we do know for sure that what you do to contribute to that project goes to making a godly impact just like that. And the second thing I wanted to bring up was, remember I said we don't bother to buy Bibles, we're going to buy them in bulk. So I found a really good deal on these. I bought a case of these, and it's not much at all. Santa Biblia, it's the New International Version of the Bible, complete Bible, paperback in Spanish. And I thought about getting another case of them, just to make sure we had enough. But I thought I'd bring it up and show you. Now this thing, each of these, when you buy it by the case, is only about $2.30. So it's a really extremely good buy. And I thought I'd give everyone who might be interested an opportunity to help with that part of the ministry. So if you have any interest in helping and getting more of these to send out, and what we do is we send these separate. We'll just leave them in the box they ship to us in, send them separate, mark them as Bibles, and then the evangelists, like the Haven there in that story I just read, would take these and use them in their ministry. And they become a tool they can hand out to the families along with that Magi box. So if you're interested in helping with that, just see me afterwards, after services this morning. So back to our lesson this morning. I hope you all drank plenty of coffee and you're ready to go for a really long, boring sermon. No, hopefully it won't be like that. First I have to thank Ken for his prayer. It's just, in a word, bullseye. That's exactly where we want to go today. In discussion about, do we own it? That's what I titled it. It's all about being accountable to God. And you'll hear that word several times this morning. And what I hope to address is several questions about that. What do you think of when you hear that word, accountability? What things pop up in your mind? Why should we be concerned with that? What do we need to do about it? And, what does God's Word say about this subject of accountability? Why is it important? And why, especially why, is it so doggone hard to accomplish? And it's not hard just here. It's hard in any human organization. Any place you got people involved where they're all pulling together to accomplish something, this word comes up as a real problem spot. So, I forgot sorry about that. I usually like to do this, drive this thing. So I want to start by looking at what God's Word says about the subject of accountability. So we'll start with first, who is accountable? And it's clear if you read here in these scriptures, starting with Ezekiel 18, you'll see that God considers everyone to be His. All souls belong to God. And if you read the rest of that chapter of Ezekiel, you'll see that Israel was complaining about God being unfair. It seemed to them that some of their righteous friends were getting punished unjustly, or at least the ones they thought were righteous. But God goes on to explain each one is accountable for his own actions. So I'm not going to punish the kids for the things their parents did, nor the parents for the dumb things their kids do. Each one is held up by his own deeds, each one being held accountable. Paul, of course, being a scribe of Israel, understood that concept very well, and he repeats it here in Romans 14. Each of us will give a personal account. So the main point of all this, of course, is that it's our own lives that are accountable to God. We should never become a stumbling block to other people by trying to judge them or say, you're doing this and that. No, you got to focus on what you're doing. And in fact, we're called to do just the opposite, to encourage our brothers. But more on that later. Christians aren't the only ones held accountable by God. Of course, the focus needs to be on us first, but the entire world is held accountable, aren't they? Sometimes you hear this argument, well, what if they've never really been introduced? What if they've never really been taught about God? Apparently, Paul had to deal with a lot of philosophers there in the Gentile world. They were famous for that in Greece and Rome and other places like that. And so he already had a logical response to them, didn't he? In Romans chapter 1, he explains, look, all creation testifies to the existence of a God. They are without excuse. And I know Ken is zeroing in on that in his Wednesday night class on Genesis. It's all about that. It is as plain as the nose on your face or the mountains in the background. There is a God. You have no excuse. And in Revelation, John reminds us that everybody, great and small, rich or poor, whatever, everybody is going to take their turn to stand before the great white throne and the one seated on it. And all of us will be judged according to what we've done in this life, according to what's recorded in that book of life. So, what is it we're accountable for then? We know that everyone is accountable in some way, but what are we accountable for? Well, as Christians, we've been given much, and so we should be concerned about how we live and how we lead. Our lives should be a reflection of those biblical values that we're always keying on every weekend and every Wednesday night. There's a story out there that everybody's familiar with. It's the story of the Titanic, right? I mean, if you haven't read about it, you've at least seen the big movie, right? And you understand what went on there. And you also understand that they really didn't plan well. They didn't have enough lifeboats, right, to completely offload the ship. But did you know that out of the 700 people that were saved, those lifeboats weren't full. They were only about half full. Did you know that? There's about 2,200 people on that ship, and only about 700 survived. So 1,500 lost their lives. And you know how they lost their lives? Well, some went down with the ship, the way it broke apart and whatnot. Some were just simply trapped and couldn't get out. But the majority of that 1,500 survived the actual sinking of the ship. They had life vests on. The majority of that 1,500 died of hypothermia. What happened? Out of those 20 boats, see, they were in a hurry. They knew the thing was going down, so they hurried up. They did the right thing, got the women and children, all the most vulnerable people on the lifeboats, and got them away from that thing, because when this thing goes down, it's going to suck everything down with it, isn't it? This is a monster of a ship. So they hurried up and got the people away from it. But when it went down, the survivors described a terrible, terrible noise of people screaming. And this noise only lasted about 2 to 3 minutes. That's because that's about how long it takes for a person to freeze to death in the North Atlantic. Only one of those lifeboats went back to find survivors. Only one. See, that's an image of us, isn't it? We're in this little lifeboat we call Skyway Hills Church of Christ. We've been rescued. We've been saved. But we can't just roll off on our own into the night knowing we're safe. We got to be about going back and finding all those people before they're lost. Each of us has been placed somewhere in our lives amongst folks that we know are lost. People who need to be saved. People who need to hear that message. And so we are held accountable for delivering that message. Now, we're not accountable for their response. They are, just like we read before. But we are held accountable, as Ezekiel explains here, for delivering that message. So what God is saying is, if you know somebody's in danger of dying and you don't do anything about it, I'm going to hold you accountable. That's pretty scary stuff, isn't it? But it is true, that's right. So, what else are we accountable for? Well, to do the things that we're talking about, to be that accountable person to God as a Christian, requires one key word to be implemented in our character. That word, of course, is integrity. And there's all kinds of examples of what that integrity is about. Moses had to choose between the riches of Pharaoh's house or the sufferings and poverty of his own people. He chose God's people. That's integrity. Daniel and his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, they had to choose between either serving the living God and not bowing down to that lifeless idol, or to die a fiery death. They took the latter. See, God is always watching, as Luke explains, for signs of integrity in our daily lives. Not just for the big moments like it's described here in those first couple of scriptures. And what he's saying is, if you're faithful in the little things, in the everyday things, if you demonstrate integrity in those, then when the big moments arise, it'll just be natural for you to demonstrate integrity then. We can't sit back and say, well, I'm going to cut corners here or cheat there. But I know when the big moment comes, I'll be ready. It doesn't work that way. That's why Jesus says, if you're faithful in little things, you'll be faithful in the large ones. So God is always watching for those signs of integrity in our lives. We're accountable for it. There's a second form of accountability we owe to God, and that's accountability for one another, for each of us here in this body of Christ. And that's part of God's plan for our corporate worship, to not only emphasize our need for Him, but to emphasize our need for one another. And so in the description here in 1 Corinthians 12, Paul describes the unit as a body, like the human body. And how ridiculous would it be for the hand to say, I don't need the rest of you, I'm good all by myself. Or the eye to say, it's all about me. And so why should I worry about one of the other organs of the body? I don't care. It's all about me. Of course it's not that way. When one suffers, we all suffer. And when one is honored, all parts are glad. All of you together are Christ's body, and each of you is a part of it. So, if someone in our spiritual family is living contrary to the Bible, we're called to confront them. How? Gently and humbly. I should have bolded those words in here. Too often we're ready to pounce and call them, confront them for some error in their life, but not with gentleness, not with humility. Those are key. It has to be done in a certain way. And if they've offended us, forgive them. and then comfort them and reassure them that God's grace is there for them too. Just like Ken mentioned in his prayer. Thank you again, Ken, for that. Own up to it. Own up to our mistakes. Help them own up to them and help them move on so that they're not chained to that baggage anymore. That's what Christ was all about. We will be free indeed. But it takes the love and accountability of each of us for one another to achieve that. But be careful. None of us is above temptation. And we're all called to be encouragers. So, 2 elements are required to support that kind of accountability. 2 characteristics of our personality. First, trust. Second, relationship. So to establish trust, as James describes, we have to be active listeners, controlling our emotional response so we focus our attention on the person and not on whatever's going on inside of us while we're listening. Not judgmental. And caring for one another deeply and genuinely, because we're all in this together. We're all fighting the same spiritual warfare against the principalities and authorities of darkness. So we're all in it together. We can't be trying to put one another down or trying to make ourselves look better at the expense of our brothers and sisters. And of course, we have to establish that relationship. How do we establish relationship? Well, it's just as natural as it could be, right? We look for common ground. We look for common experiences. That's what we do in our fellowship. We talk. We enjoy one another's company. We share our own experiences, don't we? Hey, what happened? Hey, when that happened to me, this, and whatnot. We share our common experiences. We look for that. And through that, we find empathy, we find sympathy, we find understanding. And through that relationship, we have to convince our brothers and sisters that it's okay to lose all sense of fear about rejection. Let our relationship with one another establish that sense of belonging for each and every member. Every time I think about this, and I know it's not the best example, but I can't help but think back to that old 80s sitcom, Cheers. Remember the theme song? Don't you want to go somewhere where everybody knows your name? That's what this place is supposed to be, right? Everybody knows your name. You feel comfortable here because it's your spiritual home. That's what we're accountable for establishing as part of our accountability to God. So, why is accountability so hard? This is the Church of Christ, right? And so everything I've said up to this point, you've heard it before. Probably dozens of times before, haven't you? I'm not telling you anything new. So if we know these things are about or what God expects from us, then why is it so hard? Why do we keep having problems with failures in accountability? Why are important needs of members' lives left unfulfilled? Why are important functions going undone? Are we planting? Are we cultivating? When will the harvest come in? Why is accountability like this so hard? Well, maybe to figure out, we need to go back to the beginning. Just like in the secular world, accountability is extremely important to the function of any organization. Think of society. If we didn't have rules, if we didn't have laws, if we didn't have various authorities, what a mess it would be. It already is getting messy because people don't want to adhere to those common natural requirements of any society. Holding ourselves and one another responsible for our actions. These are all essential parts of any human interaction. I love what this quote here that I took from Bill Hall in a book that he wrote called The Disciple Making Pastor. To believe you can make disciples or develop true maturity in others without some form of accountability is like believing you can raise children without discipline, run a company without rules, or lead an army without authority. Accountability is to the Great Commission what tracks are to a train. So this feature of our behavior, this part of our personality, accountability, is what takes us to where the Great Commission wants to lead us. So if we're not getting there, maybe that's why. Our tracks haven't been laid, have they? We haven't set them out straight. Maybe we got a few breaks, or they're just too crooked. We need to straighten things out. So you've heard speaker after speaker repeat the Word of God is so essential in our lives. And it is, right? But that's just the beginning. That's just the tip of the iceberg. See, there has to be so much more in the way of living our lives according to that Bible and carrying a passion for spreading the good news. That's why accountability is important to each member. So, why is it so hard to implement? Well, let's look here. Maybe part of the answer is in the way we approach the Word itself. Now, here's where I'm going to start using some things that we've been trying to apply at work, okay? And you probably have seen this in your own work. This is a very common principle now. A management consulting firm put this together, and it's an excellent idea. So here's a comparison here between the Webster's Dictionary version: liable, to be called to account, responsible, capable of being accounted for, explicable, versus this management consulting firm's concept of the term from the Oz Principle, a book written by those folks that I listed there. A personal choice to rise above one's circumstances and demonstrate ownership necessary for achieving key results. You see the differences there? You see how they twist it? It's the same definition, right? But we couch it in slightly different terms. The first one, we always think of, when I asked you, what do you think of when you think of the word accountability? Right away your mind goes, well, it's like I'm in class and I haven't done my homework and I'm afraid the teacher's going to call on me, right? Or the coach, he's going to ask me to do something hard, right? That's what we usually think of, and kind of punitive in its form, accountability. We think of it as something to be avoided. Because what happens when something goes wrong? What's the first thing that's asked? Who did this? Who's responsible for this? Who's going to fix this? And what happens? Everybody scatter. I don't want no part of that, right? Get away, get away. If you volunteer, then what happens? It's yours. Now it's yours, right? So nobody wants to be accountable for things, especially when things are going wrong, because we approach the Word in a wrong way. If we instead approach it like this: a personal choice to rise above one's circumstances and demonstrate ownership, then maybe it takes on a different meaning. What if instead we focus on the results? And you guys have been great listening to me. I'm almost done. Just hang in there with me just a couple of more minutes, okay? So in the Oz Principle, the leadership theory says that people formulate their beliefs based on their experiences. Now, let me back up a minute. Why do they call it the Oz Principle? Well, you all know the story of The Wizard of Oz, right? A book by Frank Baum was actually one of a series of books written. And actually, in that time, it was written in a time when lots of different books were being written about the government. They were kind of, challenging the performance of the government in the day. So you had books like The Wizard of Oz, you had books like Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, you had books like George Orwell's 1984. All these books were questioning the way big organizations were functioning. One in particular, the government. And they were concerned about it. And Frank Baum's book was no different. But remember the setting. It's this girl in Kansas, Dorothy, and she's really disappointed, right? She just wants to go somewhere, get out there and see the world. There's got to be something more than what I got here in little old Kansas, right? And even at one point she meets a carnival guy, and he says, well, look, Missy, I don't know, you probably got it better than you think, and you'd be unimpressed if you really did meet all those kings and queens that you talk about, that you dream about there in the world, because things really aren't all that different. No, it's got to be better. So the storm comes. Off she goes, her and Toto, to the land of Oz, right? And as soon as she gets there, it's a wonderful place, but it also has its harsh challenges. And what is the one thing that she keeps harping on that she wants once she gets to the land of Oz. Remember? I just want to go home. She got what she wanted, and now she wants to go back, right? She really misses home, but she can't get there. So they tell her, hey, follow the yellow brick road, because it'll take you to a special guy. He's the most wise person in all the land, and he can help you out. So on the way, she meets 3 friends, right? First one is who? Scarecrow. What does he want? If I only had a brain. That's right. He thinks people don't think he's dumb, or he thinks in order to accomplish something, he really needs to be impressive with his brain and his educational accomplishments and all this, right? Who's the next person she meets? Tin Man. What's he missing? A heart. If he only had a heart, he could be such a passionate person. He could be such an encourager. He could be so much help to society if he only had a heart. And then it's the cowardly lion. And what does he need? Courage, of course. If he only had that courage, he could be the leader that he knows he should be, right? Do you see what's happening there? As Frank builds the story? And so they meet the wizard, and he gives them this big assignment. And they go and they complete their mission. They work together, and they complete their mission. And they bring it back. And what happens? It's a pivotal moment in the movie. What happens when they go back to the wizard with that broomstick? Toto pulls the curtain back, right? And they figure out, this is where we get that phrase, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. Turns out he's just another guy, isn't he? And what finally is the lesson that they all learn at the end of the movie? All these things that they wanted, they already had them, right? They already had it within them. They didn't need some external force to come and rescue them. They already had the gifts, the tools, and the desire they needed. They just needed to put it to work, didn't they? And so, that's the principle of the Oz principle. You don't need a whole bunch of studies and management and all that stuff. You just need to take what you got already and put it to work. And so, the principle, the theory is that we begin with experiences. And based on our experiences, we develop our beliefs. And based on our beliefs, we take action. And then it's from those actions we see the results. Now, just to clarify, there's 3 different kinds of actions, right? There's the positive ones, there's the negative ones, and what's the third one? There's the null set, right? Where we do nothing. Doing nothing is an action, isn't it? So, any of those can produce results. It may not be the results we desire, but they all produce results, right? Well, let's back up for a minute about the beliefs. So children seem to learn real early on how to shift blame to one another, right? They learn this. What is this anyway? You know what that is? It's called the corporate salute. Right, Gene? That's what the scarecrow used too, right? Yeah, go this way. Kids learn that at the outset. I mean, I'll bet Aiden has already learned how to blame Sable. That's one of the dogs in the house. Or Spider-Man or something like that. I mean, they learn it from a very, very early age. Oh, it's so-and-so did it, you know. Where'd they learn that from? They learned it from us, didn't they? They're always watching, always listening. Everything they hear us say and do, they pick up on it, and they learn to apply it in their own lives. And that behavior doesn't stop there. It keeps going right on through adulthood. We, all of us, learn how to adapt ourselves as we grow up. And we move out of the house, out from mom and dad's home, and we begin to relate to the outside world, and we begin to relate to work and to our friends and to whatever other obligations there might be out there in society. We begin to figure out things, what works and what doesn't. And we begin to make choices based on our experiences, don't we? And we begin to formulate beliefs. Yeah, there's this, but this is really how it works, right? That's what I'm talking about when I say we build beliefs based on our experiences. So no matter what you read or you hear preached to you, the most lasting impression comes from your experiences. For instance, when you leave here today, how much of this are you going to retain? And for how long? Well, at best, this is best done in kind of a workshop format where you get to break up in little groups and do activities. But at best, in a lecture, especially in a lecture format, you're going to retain maybe 25%. This is based on studies that have done. And you're not going to retain it very long, okay, a couple of weeks at best. So this process is not about an epic moment, a life-changing experience or something like that. It's about everyday, slow, trudging on and on. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. So we have to work on changing those beliefs, don't we? It's out of those beliefs we see people generate their actions. So even though we hear everything we hear in Bible class and we believe what we read in our Bibles, if we've experienced behaviors that are contrary to that, if we've seen things amongst our peers that are contrary to the commands of God, we begin to formulate a belief, a real belief, a true belief in here that, well, that's what it says, but this is the way it's done. That's where I'm going with this. And so actions may turn out to be different than our stated beliefs. So finally, the results achieved by an organization are delivered by the actions or a lack thereof. So where do we normally respond as a church or as any organization when we fail to get the results we thought we were going to get? When the results don't work out to be what we wanted, what's the first thing an organization might do? You might see at work. Oh, we're going to write a memo. Yeah, the boss writes a memo. This is the way it's got to be done, right? Or something fails in the process somewhere. So, obviously we need to change our procedure. Right? And so we write another procedure. Maybe we don't have one. And we do the same thing here at church, don't we? We see something not quite turning out right, and so we develop another action. Well, we need another this or another that, or we need to go do this, or we need to go do that. Do we? And so this particular consulting firm, Partners in Leadership, coined a phrase called the action trap. And that's usually where management gets stuck. The only thing they try to do to correct the results is work on the actions. Well, they're 2 levels too high, aren't they? You need to go back to experiences to change the beliefs, to get the actions that generate the results. That's the theory. I think it's a pretty good one. See, if the beliefs don't support the demanded actions, we'll just get more activity, more people just going through the motions, won't we? Just following whatever they're told to do, but not really with the passion and drive towards some results. So where do we need to go? Well, it only makes sense that we start with experiences, like I said. We build beliefs based on those experiences, based on biblical principles, exampled in our behaviors and our experiences. And then once those desired beliefs are built, the actions will come naturally, and the results will start to come more naturally. So I want to close with something called the Own It model in this consultant's theory book. And you can buy that book. It's available through Amazon or wherever, the Oz principle. But the Own It model says that you have to go through these different steps. You have to be actively pursuing each of these all the time. Like I said, this isn't a sprint or a one-time epic moment. This is a marathon. So we have to make these things a part of our everyday culture, a part of our language. We have to be, first of all, personally invested. And I listed some verses here. The phrase there is pretty much out of the consultant's book. I added the verses because they seem to go with it. I think maybe they had some training somewhere because everything they said comes straight out of the Scriptures, really. It's nothing new. But it's just a different way of couching it, a different way of disciplining ourselves to apply it in our lives. So be personally invested, as 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 2 talk about commitment. It's all about that commitment, personal commitment, not the somebody else has got it. You know, when we think about accountability, when I asked you that before, maybe one of the things you think of is, well, that's them elders, isn't it? Because, Timothy and other places said, those guys are accountable. for what the body does, right? Those shepherds are accountable for what that flock does. Ooh, shoo, I hope they're doing their job, being accountable. No, you're accountable, as we said. All of us are accountable. All of us are in this together. All of us need to be totally committed. Learn from both your successes and failures. As Proverbs 24 says, it doesn't matter how many times you fall. I wish I had the rights to play some videos here because there's some great ones out there. But there's one from one of the Rocky movies where Rocky is just lecturing. And he's saying, look, it's not about not getting knocked down. You're going to get knocked down. It's about getting back up, having the courage, having the guts to get back up, to move on, to press on. That's what Proverbs 24 talks about. Though the righteous may fall 7 times, they'll rise again. So don't be afraid to fail. You'll learn from it. God wants us to. A lot of times that's the best way for us to learn. We can't be afraid to fail. Ensuring your actions are aligned with the key results the church is trying to achieve. That's so important. Otherwise, we're all just going off and we're just busy, right? We're just active, but we're not going anywhere. What's the key result? And in the examples that this consultant provides, where they've worked with businesses, I mean, the ideal, the optimal situation is where absolutely everybody in the organization can recite to you those top 3 or 4 key results. And they can tell you how their job is contributing to those key results. And that's where I wanted to go with you. Those key results, that is coming from your shepherds. That will come from your elders. And Don and Benny are working right now on a reboot of the ministry system here that they're going to roll out in a couple of weeks. And before we get there, the elders are going to put together a list of 3 or 4 key results that we want to see as a result of our activities here. And then those ministries can line up under that and say, oh yeah, I believe what I'm doing is going to do this or that, whatever. But there's going to be a focus. We need to have a focus. That's leadership, right? Leadership needs to provide that focus so that what we do is all pulling in the same direction. Psalm 119 and Hebrews 10 is all about putting God's word in our heart. That's what this is about, right? This need for accountability can't come from our head knowledge. Like I said, if we can read the Bible, we can sit through all the Bible class, we can learn the right answers in Bible class even and recite them. But that's just knowledge, isn't it? It's got to be here. So that's one of the key results. We got to move it from here to there for each of us. Finally, we got to act on the feedback and accountability we receive from others. That's that thing I described before where we're accountable to one another. Feedback's one of those words we use at work all the time. And all it's talking about is, what do you think of me? How am I doing? What advice do you have for me? What problems do you have with me, with what I'm doing and how I'm doing it? Tell me. Because I don't know if you don't tell me. That's the feedback I'm talking about. And the references here to Proverbs 11, James 3, 1 Peter 5, they're all about, what's that word? Humility, right? That's what it takes. You got to have humility. You got to be willing to take criticism from your peers, from your brothers and sisters, not for the purpose of elevating them or putting you down, but it's for the purpose of achieving those key results. We won't get there unless we can be accountable to one another. That's what that's talking about. So this is why I titled it, Do We Own It? Do we really own our accountability? Are we really willing to do the work, to submit to one another, to submit to the church in order to achieve those key results? It goes right back to that first one. Be personally invested. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. These 4 simple concepts from the Oz Principles Own It model. And I hope we can apply them here in this body of Christ. I'm hoping that through continued effort, like I said, this isn't a one and done. You're going to hear this more. In fact, I intend to later sermons to preach on different elements of this concept. But I hope that from your leadership here, you're going to keep hearing these things, these key words, these phrases. And everybody here is going to learn what those key results are. And everybody here is going to learn how to recite, okay, to know Him and to make Him known. To care and see to the prosper of our brothers and sisters, spiritual prospering. To love one another. To share with one another. That's what I hope. And that's what I think we already do to some degree. But to get to where we want to be, to really launch this thing and really achieve the results, which is to fill all these pews up that we'd like to see, we're going to need to focus on this accountability, this concept of owning it. So I hope something I said has inspired you today. I hope you'll be listening because you're going to hear more of it. But I also hope that if you have any questions at all, or you have any needs whatsoever, if you need prayer, if you need to find out more about what that relationship with Jesus is all about, and how that puts you in a place of righteousness with God through His blood, please let us know as we now